very quiet in here. It's such a big room. But it's about 2:15, actually 2:16. I'm a minute late, so I think I'll get going. Hello, everybody. My name is Barry Madore, and I work with Advantage Labs, along with Ali Mika, sitting over here, and Jeremiah Davis, who you may see running around getting all the recording for sessions set up. We together help organizations do Drupal, help them figure out what they need in order to maintain and sometimes build Drupal websites and evolve them over time. And we provide back-end skills to fill in gaps that people have. To give you that quick overview, it's really relevant to the type of things we'll be talking about today. The types of things we're talking about today in this presentation, we do all the time in strategy sessions, whiteboarding sessions, one-on-one conversations with clients all the time. This is the first time I've distilled it into a presentation. So we'll see how that goes. It's a lot to cover in an hour, so we'll see how far we get. I'd love to get a sense. I think I see some people of people that did buildamodule.com training yesterday in the room. Okay, I see a bunch of people, and then also people that this room today we kind of experimented by putting together a track of sessions that kind of cover from what are those words about that I hear in the Drupal world that I don't know what they mean, up through some core concepts that you kind of have to know a little bit about before you can really start building a Drupal website from scratch. How many people have been in this room a lot today? Came to Paul Schuzettenberg's? Cool. I went to those sessions too, including Joe's last one, and probably violated a presenter rule. There were lots of great questions that came out of Paul's session that kind of fit really well with what I want to talk about today. So I added a few extra slides and moved some things around, thinking that maybe some of you would be here for this session. So we'll see if we can get through it. Like I said, there's a lot to cover, but generally speaking, I know that we throw around a lot of terms and sometimes concepts that I talk about that I know as second nature or not second nature for other people. So feel free to ask questions. I'll try to moderate and keep things moving. But if you really are stuck and you're not going to get anything else that I say unless I explain something to you, I'd like to make sure we do that. If it gets too crazy, I'll let you know what I'm going to cover and what I'm not going to cover, and you can hold bigger questions to the end. But see how that works. Okay. Introduction to content types. What I'd like to do is go over what I'd like to cover. And okay, that's what's on the screen. Okay, I'm getting used to having two screens and a big one above my head. So the first thing that we want to do is why content types? It will also encompass what content types are, but why do we need to know about them, and why are we going to use them in Drupal? And part of that is going to be talking about today's web and data environment and how that works, generally speaking, and how Drupal fits into that environment with whatever you're building for a website and the data that you're putting on the website. So we are absolutely going to talk about what is a content type. We're going to look at a definition, some examples, and some real-world sites, and just on a brand new site from scratch. Then we're going to talk a little bit about content type strategy, or just generally content strategy. A lot of those questions that came up at Paul's sessions this morning were about, well, how do I figure out what content types that I need to make? And how many? And when do I do that? So we're going to talk a little bit about how to translate the content that you either have currently into a new Drupal site, or how you figure out what you're going to do with that. Obviously, we can't do all that. You can't go too deeply into that. But I kind of want to go through sort of a whiteboarding example of that. So today's data environment, I think a lot of what I'm going to say now, I'm going to kind of fly through it a little bit, you have heard a lot. Either it's just through the webosphere, probably in conversations you had yesterday and today. You're going to hear a lot about it tomorrow if you come to Jeff Eaton's keynote. Paul mentioned it this morning. You're going to hear a lot about it, but I just want to condense a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about. Paul mentioned this earlier today, or actually Tara mentioned the Karen McGrain's keynote presentation. Karen McGrain is a content strategist. I think that's what she would call herself. who's become really prominent lately and has written a couple great books and does amazing presentations. She did one at the DrupalCon Portland about a month or two ago, and it lit a lot of light bulbs for me. So I'm going to steal liberally from her presentation, and I have a bunch of notes, and I'm going to paste them into the Google Docs. I don't know if anybody's been using that system. Cool. So if anybody's taking notes during the session, I've got a bunch of things that I refer to in here, and you'll see links in here. At the end of the session, you'll watch me do it. I'll paste all of that into the Google Docs for this session, and you'll have them. And one of them is the video for her presentation and also a link to the slide deck. Because if you want to get deeper into what I'm about to talk about for the next 4 or 5 minutes, that's a great place to go. But the first thing the first thing that really jumped out at me relating to content types in Drupal in her session was an anecdote about Xerox PARC, the fabled Xerox PARC where GUIs came into existence. All of the Apple and Windows developers were all groupies of Xerox PARC and stealing their ideas. And she talked about how the WYSIWYG toolbar basically came into existence at Xerox PARC because Xerox had just invented the laser printer. And before that, you just had sort of teletypes and just lots of text coming out on green, white, and tractor feeds and things like that. But now you could actually have beautifully what you see is what you get, formatted, black and white, not color, I don't think yet, but you really see something that looked like you did an offset printing job with layout. And so they had the printer that could do this, but there just wasn't anything out there to produce that type of things easily, especially for people with the type of computers that were coming out. So they invented the laser printer, and so on top of that, they invented sort of the WYSIWYG toolbar and software where you could go and highlight something, make it big, change the font, and do those types of things. And for better or for worse, this is pretty much the way that a lot of people, most people, make websites today. They use a WYSIWYG toolbar, they throw everything into a big body of text, and it looks great on the screen if you're looking at it in exactly that context. And she pointed out, this is a quote from her thing, that the web is not a laser printer, so why are we still doing web pages or websites using the model that was really meant to be for a piece of paper, one particular context. Here's an example from a blog post that I found of what I'm talking about. And I'm not sure if that's a website or if it's like a Word document, but everything's in there. It's just in one big text box you're typing in, and you got bold for a headline, and then underneath you're changing your font and underlining things, and then you're embedding a picture right where you want it to be. And it's all in there, but it's all just in one little text box area. And the point that Karen is going with, and that I'm going to reiterate, and you're going to hear more from everybody else, is that really doesn't work with the multivariate way that the web works today, and the way that you want to get your message out, and what could and should and will be happening with data that you put up on the web. So the big question is, where will your data go? When you're putting things on your website, however you do that, and we'll be talking about the Drupal way to do that today, where does it go? Where it should be going is there are going to be multiple areas on your website that one piece of content that you create are going to go. You could be putting up an event, for instance, and you could have a calendar display on one page, with the whole full month with lists of events on it. In another place, you could have a block, if you learned Paul's terms from earlier today, block in a sidebar that just lists, some titles of some blog posts or pieces of content. There are going to be shortened versions of pieces of content with a read more at the bottom called teasers in Drupal and other places. There are going to be full articles where you see the whole thing, kind of like that last slide where you see everything together. And they're all going to be based on individual pieces of content that you put in there. So you can have multiple contexts on one individual website on a desktop environment. You're also going to have multiple devices or displays that are going to be looking at that website with all those things that I just mentioned. So you're going to have mobile phones, you're going to have tablets, the thermostats nowadays read data from websites. your data might be read in all kinds of different places. I hear refrigerators and toasters. Everybody's talking about all these things that web data can come from. Sometimes it sounds like a joke, but it really isn't. Data from your website may end up in these places. Then we also have multiple channels. So you've got your website with multiple displays. You've got different devices that are reading that website and trying to take a look at it. But you also have RSS feed readers that might be pulling content from your site into, I know that Google Reader's gone now, but whatever you're using instead of Google Reader. Social media services, you've got your Facebooks and your Pinterests and your Twitters. The next big thing, who knows what the next big social media service is going to be tomorrow. Your web content can be available to either be pushed or pulled by these different services. And you need to pay attention to that. Apps, iPhone apps are pulling data from, and Drupal websites are created specifically just to do that, but your site might feed data, or you might want it to feed data to some sort of app. So all of these things your data is going there as well. Your web content is going there. The easiest way to talk about this, I think, because it's sort of everybody's favorite topic these days, is to talk about mobile. Most everybody uses these now, so it's easy to talk about. So I tried to pull some charts. I didn't do a very scientific job of it, but wherever you look today, if you Google mobile versus desktop or mobile trends, those types of things, you're going to see some projections about how things are going. Here's one, and if I'm reading the data on this chart correctly, they're talking about searches. Google and search engine searches for content on the web, and how many of them, and the percentage of them, I think it's many, yeah, it's billions of searches on here, not percentage, are being done on mobile devices versus desktop devices, and where those trends are going and where they're going to converge. And the prediction on this one is somewhere about January 2015 that mobile searches will overtake mobile searches of web content using Google or another search engine approach on a mobile device is going to overtake the number of searches done on desktop devices. Similarly, I've seen many different studies, and they all say something different, but they all come pretty close to predicting that just mobile internet use in and of itself is going to overtake desktop internet usage. And I've seen a lot of them that say just about now is the time when that's going to happen. I don't know what the real data is. This particular Morgan Stanley study looks like the middle of 2013 estimated an overtake of mobile users versus desktop internet users on a 5-year projection that came out a year or two ago, as far as I understand. And another way to think about this, probably harder to, well, it's pretty big up there. Just thinking back about all of that, the tablets, for instance, specifically the iPad, the first big tablet to come out and make wide adoption, it came out in April something 2010. So that was barely three years ago. And already the trends I'm seeing in studies like this one are showing that over the period of time from July 2011 to now, these are weekly usage. So the percentage of access to the internet by devices per week, that's the percentage. So the per week average for tablet usage, for something that's only been around for 3 years, has been growing by 4 percentage points during each of these 6-month periods of time, over time, and that seems to just be growing. And so you can see that this trend of mobile usage and device usage, and who knows what the next iPad's going to be. You know, I've actually hear iWatch is going to be announced maybe sometime this year, and other devices are coming out. So thinking about all of these is important context for what we're going to talk about next, which is a little bit more esoteric. Blobs versus chunks. This is the phrase that I hadn't heard of until Karen McGrain brought it up, and now I'm hearing it everywhere. Google it. You will find lots of great things to read. I'll point you to a few that I thought were interesting besides Karen's presentations. But that's what we're going to talk about. What is a blob, and what is a chunk, and what the heck does this have to do with Drupal? So this morning, this is what Paul said in his presentation about Drupal jargon, that the page is dead, long live web content. The title of Jeff Eaton's keynote tomorrow is "The page is dead, long live the page." I think they're saying the same thing, but it would be interesting to see if that's the case. But I think what we're talking about is that we're no longer talking about that Xerox laser printout facsimile that a lot of people are creating for web pages. The page is dead. Web content or data is where we're going. So what's a blob? You always have to have one cute slide, right? This is my one cute slide. A blob is an unstructured mass of content. In this case, well, this one is highly structured in a certain way. But you dump everything you got, all the delicious stuff you got, into one particular perfect mass for a particular presentation. In this case, the dessert for my dinner party. You might see this at the party tonight at Advantage Labs. And it's great if that's what you want. But it's not reusable. You can't restructure it. You can't decide that you want those pineapple pieces in the red part of the Jell-O once you've put it there. And everything is dependent on this single presentation. There's really nothing else to it. So all the ingredients are molded together for display. But if I just want a plain old pineapple nugget, I'm out of luck, or I'm going to have to dig in there and pull it out and destroy my beautiful display. So luckily, or what if my dessert dinner party patrons actually would rather have that rather than it molded as that ring? You're kind of out of luck. Well, luckily for us, web data is reusable. Once you make a Jell-O mold out of it, you actually can pull things apart, but you have to be thinking about that and thinking about how the data is going to be reused elsewhere in order to structure your site properly in order to take advantage of those things. So that brings us to chunks. So what are chunks? I'm going to jump into another Karen McGrain anecdote from her presentation that kind of jumped out at me. And I'm really paraphrasing this. I recommend that you read the transcript or watch her presentation. But the idea was TV Guide magazine, which was around forever. I grew up in the 70s with TV, and we always had one of them around, you know, nice little, it's sitting on the side table. It was an inch magazine. You would go in and you read about Lucille Ball or the Fonz or whatever else you were reading about, and it was kind of a magazine with a lot of features. But at a certain point, that TV Guide realized that the magazine really was not going to be the end-all be-all and was beginning not to be the end-all be-all for people to get the data that they needed about television programs. And they started having their writers, instead of just writing nice little prose pieces that they would cut and paste into a magazine format, to start putting things in chunks, to define data pieces into a database. You know, the title of the show, the day that it's going to be on, a short description, a long description, a medium description, multiple different ways. And basically, to this day, if you, on your screen at home, if you've got satellite TV and you go to a TV Guide page, if you go to their website, the descriptions of shows that you see for reruns on Nick at Night or whatever from the 70s are going to have that data that those writers wrote back in 1970s and 1980s, because it was in a database, and now they can feed it to anything that can pull that and know, okay, here's the title, here's the description, and here's these other things. Nobody had to go and rewrite all of that and put it through. And that's sort of where I'm going with this, or where we're talking about this. So you might think of this more in your own content as content being stripped of display information. We're not talking about how big it's going to be, what font it's going to be, what color, how wide it's going to be. We're talking about a headline and identifying it as a headline. We're talking about a date and knowing it's a date. A description is a description. A short description is a description. And here's that chunk of data. So that's where I'm going with chunks of data. Nothing changed. Oh, the source of this slide. There's a blog post. I think that might be in my notes. He was basically paraphrasing the same presentation that I'm paraphrasing. So Drupal to the rescue. For all intents and purposes, Drupal is really well suited to solve your blob problem. It's ready for you to chunkify your content and display it as a website and have that data available for other displays within and without your site. But not right out of the box. You may have already encountered this if you download Drupal and start working with it. It's not entirely clear exactly how you would go about doing this. So we're going to talk about that. First, we should talk about what a content type is. And I know the cardinal rule is never put a big blob of text on a presentation screen and read it, but I'm going to do it. Drupal.org has a definition of content types, and I think it's pretty good, and I decided not to rewrite the wheel, and I have a link to this page so that you can, I think it's, there it is, so you can go look at this and reread it if you need it. But how they describe it is that a single website may contain or could contain many types of content, such as informational pages, news items, polls, blog posts, real estate listings, etc. In Drupal, each item of content is called a node. Getting back to what Paul talked about this morning, an individual piece of content, an individual blog post, poll, news item. And each node belongs to a single content type, which defines various default settings for the nodes that you're going to be creating with that type, such as whether the node is published automatically, whether comments are permitted. And in previous types of versions of Drupal, if you're familiar with Drupal 6 or before, content types were called node types because they were creating nodes. Kind of moving away from that whole node idea and talking more about things as being content, and so you see more and more of that. But node type and content type are pretty much interchangeable if you hear those being bandied about or read them. So that's a kind of a broad definition of content types. Where do they come from on a Drupal site? Well, first of all, the Drupal installation profile. When you first start up a Drupal website, you download it, get it on your web server, and go through. You'll have seen this if you did the build a module. You go to the point standard install. You hit the standard install. It's going to put together a Drupal website for you, a blank one. And right out of the bat, you're going to have two content types. One is called basic page in Drupal 7, and the other is called article. Drupal 6, article was called story, or have I gotten it backwards? Somebody could call me on this. Story now? Okay, so it is article. So basic page and article, but you got two. And as you'll see in a moment, they're exactly the same. There's nothing different about these two content types. So that's the first place you'll see content types in Drupal when you start from scratch is just right out of the bat, you get basic page and article. Another way that you'll see content types used in Drupal is from contributed modules. Joe was just talking in the previous session about how to pick modules you might use. There are some actually in core Drupal that if you turn them on, all of a sudden you'll go to the page where you see your content types, and there'll be another one there, or sometimes two. So contributed modules will create content types for you to be used in specific ways. And then the usual way for new content types on your site, and the exciting thing about Drupal is the ability that you can create your own content types. And you want to do that. You don't want to just have two content types that are exactly the same. One called basic page, which is completely confusing, and one called article, which may have nothing to do with what you do as an organization. So I'm going to break the other cardinal rule and do a live demo. Here is a brand new Drupal website just kicked up. And so the first thing you would do, unless somebody's already configured your site to allow, yes? Oh. Thank you. I'm new to having the to display method, and I didn't realize it would cause a problem when I do examples. That's not what I want. This is why there's a cardinal rule. Displays and, oh boy, now I'm really done for. Thank you. Where would I be without the community? All right. I should have left that open because I'm going to need to go back to that, right? Actually, what I'll do is I will skip going back and forth and read my notes from something else. All right. But now the resolution is just horrible. How much are we seeing? Oh, maybe good enough. We'll see how it goes. So this is the blank vanilla Drupal website that you've just kicked up. And I used the Acquia Dev Desktop just to put up a local copy of a Drupal site. So the first thing you'll need to do until you've set up your website to allow people to not have to log in, if you're going to let them do add content to your site, is to log in. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to remember my password. or let my computer remember it for me. All right, so now I'm on my Drupal site. Now because I have administrative privileges, I'm seeing some new menus at the top. And if you go to add content, you will have two options in reverse order to the way I explained them, but article and basic page. And they are explaining to you, Drupal's explaining to you how it intends you to use these two content types. Articles for time-sensitive things like news, basic pages for static contents like About Us. And if you go in, you will see when you go to add content that they are pretty much exactly the same. You got title tags and body to fill in and some metadata about what you want to happen to it. If I go in to add a basic page, looks like it's a little different. They don't have tags for basic pages, but pretty much almost exactly the same thing going on. The problem with this is a lot of people think, oh, I've got two content types. That's great, but I can't do different things with them because I don't have a WYSIWYG toolbar. So the first thing that they will do is go and load up or have somebody load up for them a WYSIWYG toolbar. Here is a website without logging in. This is what happens with your site after you have a toolbar installed. You now have the ability to blobify your content. And a lot of people go ahead and do this. Change your fonts, change your font size, strike through, add bulleted lists, go ahead and add a picture and do all of those things. And your Drupal site, even though everybody told you Drupal is all about chunks and it's going to change the way that you do the internet, is set up to do exactly what we're warning you against in the first part of this presentation. All right, now I'm going to switch back. Oh, I do want to do one more demo before I leave here. I was talking about how some modules will create content types for you. Let's do that. So if I go to my module section of my site, there's a blog module. And if my experience, we hardly ever turn this module on. But if my memory serves correctly, and we turn it on and enable it, if we go to add content now we have blog entry content type added to our system. So that's another way that's a second way that content types are added. While I'm here, all of your content types are administered in this structure area that I've been bandying about. So under structure, you have a content types area, and you will see a list of each of your content types, and you'll be able to go in and manage those, add and remove fields, and those types of things. We're going to talk more about that. And you can also, with a handy click of a button, go ahead and create a new one. And we're going to talk about how you should do that. The live demo. I would like to use the Cedar.org as sort of a use case example for how to do some content strategy and deciding content types and the fields that go in them, and to take a site that we helped deblobify a number of years back and make it a chunked environment. The Cedar.org, or the Cedar Cultural Center, for which the Cedar.org is their website, is a local performance venue. If you're from out of town, they do world and folk music. They have 200 plus concerts a year. So they're a venue, a presentation venue. And they have a website that promotes all of that. So what we would often do is sit down, and this is the whiteboard part of this. I'm going to do a virtual whiteboard. We'd sit down with somebody by the Cedar and say, well, what kind of content do you have? What do you put on your website? What do you need to display, and what do you need to do with it? And we start thinking about it in this chunks versus blobs, and delineated content types. We start to talk about it from not the technical end, but more about what do you have and what does it consist of. So the first thing the Cedar would say is, we have 200 plus events a year. That's what we do. That's what we put on our website. And the Cedar.org, about 5 or 6 years ago, almost all of their content was just 200 plus per year pieces of content called event with everything in it. So we talk a little bit about, well, what constitutes an event? What type of details do you put on your site about an event? And a list something like this will arrive. Well, there's a title for the event, what the name of it is. We like to have a good image of the main band. We got to put up the date. We like to put what type of concert it is. There's a description, when tickets go on sale, all these kinds of logistical information as well. So we say, great, well, here's a list of those things that are related to it. There's also artists related to it. There's a place where it happens. All of these things get delineated, and that's the information they put on the site. But then they start thinking about it and go, well, we put information about artists in an event, but we have all this other information about artists as well. So let's talk about, well, maybe we should pull that out and have information specifically about artists, because we have things that are different about artists that aren't the same about events. So we have a name of an artist, and we'll have an image of them as well, and we'll have a description, but artists have websites. They have social media presences that they would like their fans to see. They have albums and videos. We like to categorize the genre of music. And an event might have 3 people on a bill, and they might actually be different genres of music. So we want to be able to do different things with artists. So we might want to pull things out and chunkify things about artists. Then we also have these venues where they happen, but it's not just the name. We don't just say it's happening at First Avenue or it's happening in this park. We have information about those venues. We have a name, we have a picture of it. We want to say where the location is. Maybe put it in a little Google map of it. So maybe we need to pull out information and put it together in that way. Then we have bloggers, and they're going to do blog posts, and that doesn't fit with all the information about artists or creating an event. We have different fields for that, or different pieces of information that we need for that. So maybe we need this thing called a blog post. Then we have these things called series too, and how does that get in information? We have the West Bank, West Africa series, where different concepts will be categorized to this series, and we have information about it, and that's all different information. If we try to squeeze all that into an event, then everything starts to look ugly. So maybe we could pull that out and start putting together chunks of information about series as well. Then we have just announcements. Describing an important thing that happened at the Cedar Cultural Center is going to happen. We want to be able to do that as well, and that doesn't really fit any of those. Or maybe it's like a blog post, but as a matter of fact, all the fields are exactly the same as a blog post, but it seems different because a story is not a blog post. A blog post is, journal-like, and the story is different. So maybe we need a story. And then we start seeing how all of these things interact with each other. Back in the day, maybe when you would create access databases and you would start creating tables, kind of look something like this, and you start looking at, well, these things all relate to each other. So an event has a venue, so an event is going to reference a venue. And an event includes artists, so we might reference some artists that have their own separate piece of content. And you can see the arrows go in different directions, different places. I create a blog post, same thing. I might relate it to an event. I might relate it to an artist. Or these are things that we want to do at the Cedar. Because if we put up a blog post and it is about an event, we want people to know that there's an event and go buy tickets to it. So you start to see these things connecting to each other. And there's overlap, but there's distinction, and important distinction. And then we can also have a parking lot. There are other things we do. Should they be content types? Should they be not? Let's keep that open for discussion. We have sponsors. Is that a content type too? When the current radio station sponsors an upcoming concert, do we need a content type for that? Album. Artists have albums. Is that something you want to store on our site? All the tracks of an album or all the albums that an artist has? Or are we just going to put it in a list somewhere? Press release. Everybody always wants a separate content type for press release. Does that make sense? Is it different from a story? So there's discussions that you're going to have and considerations that you're going to want to take into consideration when talking about all of this. So that was kind of a whiteboarding session. What do we have? What do they consist of? How do they relate to each other? This is what we recommend that you do for your own content, and figure out how things should naturally be divided, and maybe how some things should actually converge, and think about those things and how you might want to display them on the site. I'll show you on the Cedar how that model that I showed you, which is a rough approximation of what their website has for content types right now, how that works and how the displays work. But first, here are kind of the considerations that I think you should start keeping in mind when you're talking about these things. The first and foremost is who's creating this content on your site, and how do they do it, where do they do it, how often do they do it, what's going to be complex for them to understand, what's going to be easy for them to understand. Also with content authors, take the other side of that in case it's different people. Who maintains the content once it's already been created? Who goes in and makes the change that needs to be made, and maintaining the content on the site. Here's a big one. Joe talked about this in the last session quite vociferously. Importing legacy content. Most people get into Drupal not for their first website. They already have a website in something else. Maybe Dreamweaver using Contribute with a bunch of just HTML pages. Maybe another content management system. Maybe you were using WordPress and found that it wasn't as flexible as you needed it to be, and Drupal seems maybe to be the next place to go. Importing legacy content is something to think about and get some help figuring out. How is the content from your legacy system going to move into this new world of content types and fields, the chunks that we're talking about in Drupal? And then there is the quantity and clumping of content types that kind of gets to what I was just talking about with that parking lot. How many content types should we have? When do we have too many? When maybe should we put a few of them together? So for instance, in that model that I showed you when we talked about story and blog, they had all the exact same fields. Was it story and blog? Yeah, I think it was story and blog, where they had all the exact same fields. Maybe we don't need two content types for that. Maybe it's confusing. Somebody goes in and said, am I writing a story or am I writing a blog post? I really don't understand the difference between the two. Maybe what we can do is have one content type potentially called story or article. It's article on the Cedar site. I realized that I got that mix up again. And we'll have another field that just categorizes them. I'm creating a story, but it's a blog post, or it's a news item, or it's a press release. All of those things are relatively similar. They have the same fields. So we'll categorize them so that we can put them in different places. But instead of confusing everybody and having a news content type and a blog content type and an article content type and a story content type, confronting content authors with that, especially if they don't have a whole lot of orientation, or if you have volunteers that do one or more of these things, figuring out how you can clump or overlap or move things together logically without risking the blobification that we're talking about, using some of the Drupal tools that will help you with that. Another thing to think about, it's a little bit more abstract till you get into it, is that, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's absolutely concrete. When you create a content type, it's kind of permanent. And you start creating content in a content type, that content is of that type. And it's not as easy. You can't just flip a switch and say, okay, that blog post is now an event. You've created something that has some permanence. So thinking through the ramifications and testing things out with content authors or people that are maintaining your site is important around the time when you're doing the whiteboarding and the content architecting before you actually mint your live site and make it live. So that whole idea of too many versus one long one, because the other problem is to say, yes, these content types are kind of the same, so let's put them together, and now you've got 54 fields, because, oh yeah, when it's a blog post, we have to link it to this thing, so we have that field, but when it's a news item, we have to say, where did it come from? It came from this particular source, so we have that source field. Then you've got 54 fields, and somebody goes in and says, I don't know how to create this content. Do I have to fill out every single field? You start confusing people. So there's kind of grades of figuring these things out. So I may have already talked through this example. Let's see. So good uses of having separate content types when you might think you only need one. So on the Cedar, we have one event content type. But for other organizations, they have different types of events, going back to what I just said, that have different data needs. So if you have a workshop, you have information about what the workshop is about, and you might have different fields with that. But if you then have a meetup, might have a completely different set of information that you need to store and present. And if you mash those together in one content type, again, you might have confusion and filling out fields that have nothing to do with meetups when you're creating a meetup and the other way around. So you might want a meetup content, event content type, and a workshop content type to avoid that type of confusion. In other cases, that's not a consideration. And in that example, since both of them will have a date field in common, if you have a calendar, you'll still be able to display all of your events even though they come from two different content types. So there are strategies that you can use for this. I already gave this example. The example of having too many article-like content types, especially if their names are semantically similar to each other and they all have the same fields. You'll end up, people will use the wrong one, however many times out of 10. And you will have confusion on your site and displays where you want all of articles of one type to show up versus all of another type. You would potentially have mix and match and have a site that is not as cogent as you want it to be in terms of the content. In the case of this example, as I mentioned before, you could use a category field, have one content type, and delineate it by a category. So I wanted to show you a little bit about how this works on the Cedar site, maybe get a better picture of how delineating your content types, how they come together, how the data on your site comes together and is displayed in the context of the website. So this is it's an older event on the Cedar site, but it is what happened when Brian of the Cedar entered all the information about a Tomorrowland concert that was coming up. The data came in, they booked the concert. He went in and clicked on enter an event, put in the information, and then this is the page that results. So the information in blue is the data that he entered at the time. And I'll show you the back end of this so you get an idea of what the form looks like. So he entered all that information, posted it on the site, and based on the content architecture that they put together, based on the content types they created and the relationships that they created within them, this is the page that resulted. So because of the information that he put in the fields about when the doors open and the date and the cost of tickets and those types of things, this information posts in the way that you see it here, but also we have information at the bottom of the screen in a block that shows information about the venue where it's happening that pulls information from that venue content type because we put in a separate piece of content about this venue. Similarly, we have the event, but we also have that artist content type. So we put in information on the site about Tomorrowland because Tomorrowland plays at the Cedar every time they come to the US. So there's information that you put on the website that's going to be relevant every time they come about the band, not the event. So there's a piece of content on the site about Tomorrowland. And because we reference that artist in the event, we can pull information from that artist node, that artist piece of content, and display that in a block on this page as well. So it's being repurposed. You could look at the Tomorrowland artist page as a full article in and of itself and see all that information, but we can also pull a teaser of that information onto this display because it's relevant to somebody that's looking at going to the concert. Similarly, we have the blog post on the site, and the blog post can be referenced to an artist, and Drupal can figure that out by creating those relationships and also display information that's relevant to this event from blog posts, and not just random blog posts, but ones that reference this event or an artist to this event. Similarly, Tomorrowland, there is a video content type or a media content type on the site. I think this might have been one of those parking lot questions. Should we have that as well? Would be similar to albums. In this case, they do. They actually put in individual videos that represent the band, ones that they think are good representations of how they will play in concert at the Cedar, and they like people to watch those so they get excited about the concert. So because they put in that Tanaran is one of the artists related to this concert, there we can show the videos that are also on the site that reference that. So all these things start coming together. The series, they put in the series, we can pull in that information as well. And sponsors, which was a parking lot, and I think I gave it away. They did end up doing a sponsor content type. So here's the back end of the event content type. We're not going to get too deep into the technicalities of this, but I just wanted you to be able to see that those fields that we put in our whiteboard, our model, in action on the site. So here's a group of fields that are all about that logistic information. One thing that should note about content types in Drupal and the custom fields that you put in, all of the fields can and should be semantic. They're not all text fields. In other systems, I know you can create custom fields, but they're all just text fields, and you type in information. In Drupal, there are modules, field-related modules, that will give you the option and the capability of adding fields that store semantic data. So a date is a structured date. It's not you typing in Thursday, February 2nd, although you can do that, but it will translate in the back end to specific date. And there are ways to pick them on calendar, little widgets, things like that, because it specifically is a date field. There are number fields, and there are file fields for storing images and items of media or documents that have widgets and semantic information and metadata that are related to that type of data that you're adding to a piece of content in Drupal, which then provide that chunk data that you need for other uses inside your site and outside of your site. So a lot of these you'll see under the type column on the right-hand side of this list of fields for the event content type, you'll see what type of field those are, and that's that semantic data. And you'll notice that there are some that are already built into core Drupal. So if you add a field to your content type, it'll ask you what type of field is this field that you're adding. Is it a date field? Is it a text field? Is it a file field? And that will be reflected in your back end here as well. The node reference field, that's a concept in Drupal that allows us to make those connections between one piece of content and another. So all of that stuff that I said was really magic about how Tanarowin's little teaser will show up at the bottom and the West Africa series information will show up at the top. That's because we have a concept in Drupal, a field type, that allows us to relate one piece of content to a piece of content in another content type, so that those references can be made, and then you can invoke those references in views, which will be talked about by Tess in 10 minutes. So there's the way that you can then take those relationships and use them and create the displays that we're looking at here. And I packed too much into this presentation, so let's keep going. So I've already done this with the other one, but here is where those things, when you enter the data for them, where they appear. Oh. Get stuck with the multiple parts of one slide. And I'm going to skip through this. This is another example on their site of a different content type. You can see what happens when you enter information for each of these into each of these different types of fields, how they end up being displayed. So information for title shows up as a headline. Information for an image, because it's a file field, shows a representation of that, a display of that image. It doesn't show the title of an image. And then the body is the body and those pieces. And then the referencing information brings that information in, all based on the type of field inside this content type. Oh, I guess that was close to the end of what I had to talk about anyway, so this is good. That is a lot of information, and I realize now that even though it was a lot of information, I talked really quickly and I didn't answer any questions, so I want to answer questions. But I also want, I have information about just about everything that I talked about, some reference information, further places that you can look and where you can go to find more information about this stuff. And it's going to be posted in the Google Doc that's related to this session. So if you go to the session page for the Intro to Content Types session, there's a link to a Google Doc. There might be some notes in there already. If there aren't, there will be some because I'm going to post them in there. So go to that to find some links and references. Here's more information about me. And Advantage Labs, you can reach at advantagelabs.com. I realized I didn't put our website fully in there. But here's how you can find out more about me or get in touch with me or follow things that I say. The groups.drupal.org/twin-or-cities is our local Drupal user group where you can come and say, I'm completely befuddled by what Barry told me on Friday. I'd like to find more about it and be more clear about it or ask further questions about it. This is the place to go, and they're often at our meetups on the fourth Wednesday of the month. They're listed there, so you don't have to remember that. We'll have topics and presentations and the ability for you to network and socialize. So that happens as well. All right, first time doing this presentation. Feeling myself overwhelmed. How overwhelmed are you? Do you have questions? What could I help clarify for you? What? Sure. Yes. Ah. Probably. It would be important to find out what type of field that was that you were using. Okay. Because sometimes drop-down fields are used for categories, which are often come from vocabularies from the taxonomy system of Drupal. Okay. I don't know off the top of my head why that would disappear. The value in, yeah, so a lot of times when you're creating values in a field, Drupal has a convention, it's a database convention, where you can have a label and a value for everything you put in that drop-down. And if you do that, I'm trying to remember which is on the left and which is on the right. I think left is the label and right is the value, I think. So you put in the term that you think you're using right now, that you want to use, you know, lemon, and then you put in a pipe, and then you have the up and down the symbol. And on the right-hand side, you put a value that's going to be stored in the database and always stay there. So maybe fruit 1. So fruit 1 is now lemon, and you decide, well, fruit 1 is now an orange. So you go in and change the label of lemon to orange, and that's what people see in the drop-down. But fruit 1 stays the value that's in the database. So anything that was called lemon before is now called orange and hasn't disappeared from your site. So that's, sure. And there are ins and outs like that for all the different field types that you use in your content types. About that particular issue, I did put, there's a link in that, that's going to go into the Google Docs for the section on the Drupal site where all the modules are that are related to fields, and that would be a good place to start. Unfortunately, all of the modules about fields aren't categorized as field, but there's a good chunk of them there. You can get a sense of what type of modules in Drupal relate to custom fields for my content types. So that would be a place to start. Then otherwise, and then if you know what module you're using or what field type you're using, just find that module. And a lot of time the module page on Drupal.org will have documentation if you're lucky. Or at least you'll find about as much technical information as documented about that, and it will give you a head start on asking somebody that you think might know more than you do about it at a user group or in the user forums on Drupal.org or other places where you find smart people that are doing Drupal like here.